Money whispers, but dirty wealth screams. When the feared matriarch of the city's most dangerous crime family decided to publicly destroy a 22-year-old waitress over a spilled glass of Bordeaux, she expected tears and begging. What she got instead forced the entire restaurant into a breathless, terrifying silence. The lighting inside Laura was deliberately designed to make everyone look like a masterpiece, painted by Caravaggio, deep shadows, golden highlights, and an atmosphere thick with expensive secrets. Located in the heart of Chicago's Gold Coast, it was the kind of establishment where reservations were booked months in advance, and the menu didn't list prices, because if you had to ask, you simply didn't belong. Chloe Harding belonged there, but only because she wore the black vest and pristine white apron of the waitstaff. At 22, she was an invisible ghost moving between tables, pouring $1,000 bottles of wine and serving beluga caviar to politicians, tech billionaires, and the undisputed kings of the city's underworld. "Table 4 is yours, Chloe," Nathaniel, the restaurant's perpetually sweating maitre d' whispered sharply, adjusting his silk tie. "And for God's sake, don't drop anything. It's him." Chloe didn't need to ask who him was. She grabbed her silver serving tray, her heart executing a slow, heavy thud against her ribs. Silas Romano. He was 31 years old, possessed a jawline that looked like it had been carved from marble, and held the title of the undisputed head of the Romano syndicate. Following the sudden and violent death of his father 2 years prior, Silas had taken over the family's vast network of import-export businesses. He was ruthless, calculating, and terrifyingly quiet. He never shouted. He never had to. And for the past 6 months, he had refused to be served by anyone other than Chloe. As she approached the corner booth, cloaked in the discreet privacy of velvet curtains, Silas looked up from his phone. The cold, dead-eyed expression he wore for the rest of the world instantly fractured, softening into something dangerously warm. He was wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that hugged his broad shoulders, his dark hair immaculately styled, a heavy platinum watch peeking out from his cuff. "Good evening, Mr. Romano," Chloe said, her voice perfectly modulated, though her hands trembled imperceptibly. "I told you to call me Silas, Chloe," he murmured, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that sent a shiver down her spine. He didn't look at the menu. He only looked at her. "You look tired tonight. They're working you too hard." "It's a Friday, sir. The rush is expected. I could have Nathaniel give you the rest of the night off. You could sit." He gestured to the empty leather seat across from him. It was an invitation that crossed every boundary of her employment. An invitation that could get her fired or, worse, drag her into a world she had spent her entire life trying to avoid. "I appreciate the offer, but I have a job to do," Chloe replied, offering a polite, practiced smile. "The usual prime rib, medium rare?" Silas smiled, a slow, devastating curve of his lips. "Only if you bring it to me." Their dynamic was a delicate, dangerous dance. Chloe wasn't naive. She knew what Silas Romano was. She read the papers. She heard the whispers in the kitchen from Evelyn, the head bartender, about the men who went missing when they crossed the Romano family. Yet, with her, Silas was a different man. He tipped her in $100 bills. He listened to her when she spoke about her mundane college classes. And once, when a drunk hedge fund manager had grabbed Chloe's wrist, Silas had merely stood up. He hadn't said a word. The hedge fund manager had paled, dropped her wrist, and practically ran out of the restaurant. But tonight, the atmosphere in Laura was different. There was a suffocating tension bleeding through the kitchen doors. At exactly 8 p.m., the heavy mahogany front doors swung open, and the temperature in the room seemed to plummet by 10 degrees. "Oh, God," Evelyn muttered, polishing a glass so hard it looked ready to snap. "The Queen Mother is here." Chloe turned toward the entrance. Walking in with the lethal grace of a starved panther was Beatrice Romano. Silas's mother was a legend in her own right. While the men in the Romano family dealt in blood and bullets, Beatrice dealt in high society, politics, and psychological warfare. She was a woman in her late 50s, impeccably preserved, wrapped in a cream-colored Valentino coat with a string of South Sea pearls resting against her collarbone. Her eyes were sharp, dark, and entirely devoid of empathy. She was accompanied by two massive bodyguards who immediately took up positions by the entrance. Tonight was a family dinner, a rare occurrence. Silas had booked the entire back section of the restaurant. Nathaniel was practically bowing as he led Beatrice to Silas's booth. Silas stood up, buttoning his jacket, and kissed his mother on both cheeks. The affection between them looked choreographed, a display for the public rather than genuine warmth. "Chloe," Nathaniel hissed, materializing beside her and grabbing her elbow. "You are on their table. Exclusive service. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not make eye contact with the mother. Just pour, serve, and vanish. Am I clear?" "Crystal," Chloe said, grabbing a fresh towel. She walked toward the table, just as Beatrice took her seat. The matriarch was already scanning the room with obvious disdain. As Chloe approached to pour the sparkling water, Silas looked up, his eyes catching hers. It was a fleeting look of reassurance, but in the dangerous world of the Romanos, a single look was a loud declaration. Beatrice didn't miss it. The older woman's dark eyes snapped toward Chloe. She looked the waitress up and down, her gaze pausing on Chloe's cheap, sensible work shoes, traveling up her uniform, and finally resting on her face. Beatrice's expression didn't change, but her eyes narrowed into absolute, freezing calculation. The predator had just spotted a mouse playing with her favorite son. The first hour of the dinner service was an exercise in pure psychological endurance. Beatrice Romano did not raise her voice. She didn't have to. She used her words like scalpels, making precise, agonizing cuts. She sent her appetizer back twice, claiming the foie gras was bruised. She complained about the ambient temperature, forcing Nathaniel to adjust the thermostat until the rest of the patrons were practically shivering. Through it all, Chloe remained the picture of professional grace. She refilled water glasses silently, cleared plates with swift precision, and ignored the heavy, protective gaze Silas kept leveling at her. "You seem distracted tonight, Silas," Beatrice noted, delicately dabbing her lips with a linen napkin. "You barely touched your veal." "I'm fine, Mother," Silas replied, his tone clipped. "Just thinking about the shipping manifest for the harbor." "Are you?" Beatrice asked, her voice dripping with mock innocence. She slowly turned her head, her gaze locking onto Chloe, who was standing a few feet away at the serving station. "I thought perhaps you were preoccupied with the help." The word help hung in the air, heavy and offensive. Silas's jaw clenched. "Mother, enough." "Oh, don't be so sensitive, darling," Beatrice chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. She raised two fingers in the air, a dismissive summoning gesture. "Girl, come here." Chloe took a breath, smoothed her apron, and walked over to the table. "Yes, ma'am? Can I get you anything else?" "We will have the Chateau Patras. The 1,990, Beatrice ordered, not looking at Chloe but at Silas. "It was a $10,000 bottle of wine, and see that you decant it properly. I despise when amateurs bruise a vintage because their hands are shaking." "Right away, ma'am." Chloe went to the cellar, her hands remarkably steady. She knew exactly what Beatrice was doing. It was a classic power play. The matriarch was establishing dominance, marking her territory, and putting the peasant back in her place. When Chloe returned with the dust-covered bottle, the table was dead silent. Silas was staring daggers at his mother, the veins in his neck standing out against his collar. Beatrice simply smiled, a serene, victorious expression. Chloe presented the cork to Silas, who nodded tightly. She then moved to Beatrice's right side to pour the wine into the crystal goblet. She poured perfectly. Not a drop was out of place. As Chloe began to pull the bottle up and twist to prevent a drip, Beatrice's arm suddenly moved. It wasn't an accident. It was a swift, calculated strike. The back of Beatrice's wrist slammed into the heavy glass bottle in Chloe's hand. The heavy red wine sloshed violently. The bottle jerked, and a torrent of deep, ruby-red liquid spilled across the pristine white tablecloth, splashing heavily onto Beatrice's cream-colored Valentino coat and completely soaking the front of Chloe's white apron. Crash. The heavy crystal wine glass tipped over and shattered on the floor. The entire restaurant, every billionaire, every politician, every mobster, went dead silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. The jazz music playing overhead suddenly sounded deafening. "You stupid, clumsy little bitch," Beatrice hissed. The mask of high society elegance violently tore away, revealing the brutal street thug mentality that had built the Romano Empire. Beatrice stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. Silas was on his feet in a microsecond. "Mother, that was your fault." You hit her arm. "Silence, Silas," Beatrice snapped, pointing a manicured finger at him. She then turned her venom back to Chloe, who was standing perfectly still, the $10,000 wine dripping from her apron onto her cheap shoes. "Look at what you've done," Beatrice snarled, her voice carrying across the silent dining room. "This coat is worth more than your miserable life." But this is what happens, isn't it? This is what happens when gutter trash tries to serve royalty. You think I don't see you? You think I don't see you fluttering your cheap little eyelashes at my son? Nathaniel, the manager, was sprinting across the floor, looking like he was about to have a heart attack. "Mrs. Romano, I am so deeply sorry. I will have her fired immediately. I will pay for the coat." "Shut up," Beatrice ordered Nathaniel, without breaking eye contact with Chloe. Beatrice reached into her designer handbag, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and threw it onto the floor, letting it land in the puddle of spilled wine and shattered glass. "Get on your knees," Beatrice commanded, her voice vibrating with malice. "Get on your knees. Wipe up my shoes with your apron, and you can keep the $100. It's probably more than your father ever made in a week." Silas moved. He stepped around the table, his fists clenched, his eyes blazing with a murderous rage that made the bodyguards instantly reach inside their jackets. "Mother, if you say one more word to her." "Silas." "No." The voice was soft, but it cut through the tension like a straight razor. It didn't come from Beatrice. It came from Chloe. Silas froze. Beatrice blinked, taken aback by the sheer, unadulterated calm in the waitress's voice. Chloe didn't cry. Her lip didn't quiver. She didn't look at Nathaniel, and she didn't look at Silas. She looked directly into the cold, dead eyes of Beatrice Romano. Slowly, deliberately, Chloe reached down to the floor. She picked up the shattered base of the wine glass, ignoring the sharp edges that dug slightly into her fingers. She stood back up, her posture immaculate, radiating an aristocratic dignity that made Beatrice's designer clothes look like a cheap Halloween costume. "My father," Chloe began, her voice echoing perfectly in the pin-drop silence of the restaurant, "made considerably more than $100 a week, Mrs. Romano." Beatrice scoffed, crossing her arms. "Is that right? And what did the pathetic man do? Sweep streets?" "No," Chloe said, tilting her head slightly, her brown eyes turning as hard and cold as obsidian. "He was a forensic accountant. His name was Arthur Harding. Does that ring a bell, Beatrice?" The effect was instantaneous. All the color drained from Beatrice Romano's face, leaving her looking like a wax corpse. The arrogant smirk vanished, replaced by an expression of stark, unadulterated terror. Even Silas stepped back, his eyes widening in shock. What?" Beatrice whispered, her voice cracking. "Arthur Harding," Chloe repeated, taking one single predatory step closer to the most dangerous woman in Chicago. "The man who 5 years ago audited the shell corporations your late husband used in the Cayman Islands. The man who discovered that you, Beatrice, were embezzling millions from your own family's syndicate to fund a private account in Zurich. Account number 8429B. The same man who mysteriously drove his car off a bridge 3 days before he could show those files to your husband." Someone in the back of the restaurant gasped. The bodyguards looked at each other, visibly unnerved. Silas slowly turned to look at his mother, a terrifying, dark realization dawning on his face. Chloe looked down at the soaked $100 bill on the floor, then back up at the trembling matriarch. "I didn't take this job to flirt with your son," Chloe whispered, her voice laced with venom. "I took this job to watch you eat, to learn your habits, and to wait for the perfect moment to let you know that the copies of my father's files are scheduled to be sent to the FBI, the IRS, and the heads of the 5 rival families the moment anything happens to me." Chloe tossed the broken wine glass onto the table. It clattered against the fine china. "I'll gladly clean up this wine, Mrs. Romano," Chloe said, a deadly smile finally touching her lips. "But who is going to clean up you?" The silence inside Leroy was no longer just heavy. It was absolute, suffocating terror. The string quartet in the corner had completely stopped playing, their bows hovering inches from their cellos and violins. At the surrounding tables, politicians and billionaires sat entirely frozen, desperately pretending they hadn't just witnessed the unearthing of a blood-soaked mob secret. Beatrice Romano's mouth opened and closed. For the first time in her 58 years, the undisputed queen of the Chicago underworld had absolutely nothing to say. Silas's reaction, however, was what made the blood turn to ice in Chloe's veins. He didn't shout, he didn't pull a weapon. Instead, a terrifying, unnatural stillness washed over him. He slowly turned his head away from Chloe and fixed his gaze entirely on his mother. His eyes, usually a warm, dark amber when he looked at Chloe, had gone completely dead. "Account 88429B, Silas repeated. His voice barely registered above a whisper, yet it carried the lethal weight of a loaded gun. That was the account Dad was looking for before his car exploded on the Kennedy Expressway. The missing $12 million. "Silas, darling, listen to me," Beatrice stammered, the aristocratic veneer fully shattering. She reached out to touch his sleeve, but her hand was trembling, so violently her diamond rings clattered against his platinum watch. "This girl is lying. She's a grifter. Look at her. She's trying to extort us. You can't possibly believe. Did you kill Arthur Harding?" Silas asked. The question was a guillotine dropping. "No, of course not. Silas, you are my son." "Dominic," Silas said, not raising his voice, not breaking eye contact with his mother. From the shadows near the coat check, a massive man in a tailored Navy suit stepped forward. Dominic was Silas's underboss, a man who possessed the build of a freight train and the calculating mind of a chess grandmaster. "Yes, boss," Dominic replied, his voice a low rumble. "Escort my mother to the estate in Lake Forest. Confiscate her phone. Lock down the perimeter. She is not to speak to anyone, contact her lawyers, or leave the property until I have personally verified every word this woman just said." Silas finally looked away from Beatrice, his jaw locked in a rigid line. "If she tries to make a call, break her fingers." Beatrice gasped, taking a stumbling step backward. "You would do this to your own mother? Over the word of a serving girl?" The 2 massive bodyguards who had walked in with Beatrice immediately stepped away from her, realigning themselves behind Silas. In the Mafia, loyalty was a currency, and Beatrice's account had just been abruptly emptied. "Take her," Silas ordered. As Dominic and the guards unceremoniously gripped Beatrice by the elbows and marched the hyperventilating matriarch out the heavy oak doors, Silas finally turned his attention back to Chloe. Chloe was still standing by the shattered glass, her white apron stained crimson, her chest heaving with adrenaline. She had played her hand. There was no going back to serving prime rib and pouring water. She reached behind her back, untied the knot of her apron, and let the wine-soaked fabric fall to the floor right next to the crisp $100 bill. "I quit," Chloe said to Nathaniel, the maitre d', who was currently hiding behind the host stand, looking pale enough to faint. Without waiting for a response, she turned on her heel and walked out the kitchen doors, exiting through the service alley into the biting, freezing wind of the Chicago night. She didn't make it to the end of the alley before she heard the heavy, measured footsteps behind her. "Harding." Chloe stopped, but didn't turn around. She pulled her thin wool coat tighter around her shoulders. Silas stepped out of the shadows, the neon light from the street casting sharp, dangerous angles across his face. He lit a cigarette, the brief flare of the lighter illuminating the absolute storm raging in his eyes. "You played a very dangerous game tonight, Chloe," Silas said, exhaling a plume of smoke into the frigid air. If you had those files, you should have gone to the FBI 5 years ago. Why wait? Why serve me my dinner for 6 months? Chloe finally turned to face him. Because 5 years ago I was 17 years old, burying my father in a closed casket. The police ruled it an accident. The FBI told me I was a grieving teenager with an active imagination. I knew the only way to get justice wasn't through the law. The law works for people like you. I had to wait until I could get close enough to the Romano family to find the weak link. Silas took a step closer, towering over her. The proximity was intoxicating, dangerous, electric. And you thought my mother was the weak link? No, Chloe whispered, staring up at him, refusing to back down. I knew you were. Silas froze, the cigarette burning, forgotten between his fingers. You loved your father, Chloe continued, her voice trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the freezing wind and the sheer magnitude of what she was doing. Evelyn in the kitchen gossips. The whole city knows. You took over the syndicate, but you spent the last 2 years hunting for the people who planted that bomb. I didn't need to destroy Beatrice. I just needed to hand her to the man who would. Silas stared at her, genuinely stunned. He had spent his life surrounded by hardened killers, brilliant lawyers, and ruthless politicians. Yet, the most brilliant, stone-cold tactical maneuver he had ever witnessed had just been executed by a 22-year-old waitress making minimum wage. Where are the files, Chloe? Silas asked, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerously soft. Safe, she replied. And if I don't log into a specific encrypted server every 48 hours, they automatically forward to a list of federal prosecutors and reporters. So, if you're thinking of throwing me in the river, Silas, you'll be joining your mother in federal prison by Monday. Silas threw the cigarette onto the wet asphalt and crushed it beneath his Italian leather shoe. He closed the distance between them, stopping mere inches from her. Chloe could smell the expensive cologne and the sharp tang of tobacco. I'm not going to throw you in the river, Chloe, Silas murmured, his eyes dropping briefly to her lips before meeting her gaze again. But my mother is not a woman who waits for judgment. By tomorrow morning, she will hire people outside of my control to find you, torture the location of those files out of you, and bury you under a concrete foundation. He reached out, his large, warm hand, gently gripping her elbow. A jolt of electricity shot up Chloe's arm. You're coming with me, Silas commanded. I'm not going anywhere with a mob boss, Chloe fired back, trying to yank her arm away, but his grip was like iron. You don't have a choice, Silas said, his voice dropping the polite facade. He was no longer the charming customer at table 4. He was the apex predator of Chicago. You just declared war on Beatrice Romano. You need an army. I am the only army you've got. The black, armored SUV tore through the midnight streets of Chicago, the rain lashing against the tinted bulletproof windows. Chloe sat in the back leather seat, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Silas sat next to her, a brooding silhouette illuminated only by the passing streetlights. He was typing furiously on a heavily encrypted phone, barking brief, coded orders to his lieutenants. Where are we going? Chloe finally asked, the adrenaline of the restaurant confrontation beginning to crash, replaced by a creeping, bone-deep exhaustion. A secure location, Silas replied without looking up. A penthouse registered to a dummy corporation. My mother doesn't know about it. Nobody does, except Dominic. And you trust Dominic? Silas finally lowered the phone, turning his head to look at her. In my world, Chloe, trust is a liability. I pay Dominic enough that betraying me would be financially irresponsible. That's as close to trust as I get. 30 minutes later, the SUV descended into a subterranean parking garage beneath a sleek, ultra-modern high-rise overlooking Lake Michigan. They took a private elevator that required a retinal scan from Silas to operate. When the doors opened, Chloe stepped into a sprawling, minimalist penthouse, enclosed entirely by floor-to-ceiling glass. The city skyline sparkled below them like scattered diamonds, a beautiful, deceptive facade masking the rot underneath. Make yourself comfortable, Silas said, shrugging off his charcoal suit jacket and tossing it onto a white leather sofa. He walked over to a dark mahogany wet bar and poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a crystal glass. "We're going to be here for a while. I don't want a drink. I want a laptop," Chloe said, crossing her arms, feeling wildly out of place in her cheap clothes and scuffed work shoes. "I need to show you the ledger. I need to prove I wasn't bluffing." Silas paused, the glass halfway to his lips. He took a slow sip, the ice clinking loudly in the quiet room. He walked over to a sleek metal desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a matte black laptop. He set it on the glass coffee table. "Show me." Chloe sat on the edge of the sofa, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She bypassed 3 separate security walls, entering passcodes she had spent the last 5 years memorizing. Finally, a stark black-and-white spreadsheet materialized on the screen. Silas leaned over her shoulder, his chest brushing against her back. The physical contact was fleeting, but it sent a hot, confusing flush up Chloe's neck. She tried to ignore it, pointing at the glowing numbers. "Here," Chloe said, her voice steadying as she fell into the familiar territory of her father's work. 3 months before your father died, Beatrice began siphoning funds from the Romano shipping ports. Small amounts at first. 50,000 here, 100,000 there. She routed them through a shell company called Apex Holdings. Silas's eyes narrowed, scanning the columns of data. Apex Holdings. I know that name. It was a front for the Calabrese family. "Exactly," Chloe said, turning to look up at him. They were incredibly close. She could see the faint stubble on his jawline. She wasn't just embezzling, Silas. She was funding your father's greatest rivals. And look at the date of the final, massive transfer. $12 million. Silas looked at the date. His breath hitched slightly. "October 14th, he whispered. 2 days before the car bombing," Chloe confirmed softly. Silas stood up abruptly, backing away from the table as if the laptop had caught fire. He walked to the massive glass window, staring out at the stormy lake. The silence stretched, thick and agonizing. Chloe watched the muscles in his back tense, the realization washing over him. His mother hadn't just stolen money. She had financed the assassination of her own husband. Suddenly, Silas's phone buzzed on the wet bar. The sound was violently jarring. Silas snatched it up. "Speak." He listened for a moment, his face draining of whatever color was left. "Are you sure?" He hung up, turning to look at Chloe. The look in his eyes made her blood run cold. "My mother escaped," Silas said, his voice devoid of emotion. Chloe shot to her feet. "What? You said Dominic had her surrounded. You said the perimeter was locked down." "Dominic is dead," Silas replied coldly. 2 of my men found him in the driveway of the Lake Forest estate with a bullet in the back of his head. The bodyguards, too. Beatrice made a call. "How? You took her phone." "She didn't use a phone," Silas said, dragging a hand through his perfectly styled hair, ruining it. "She used a panic button sewn into the lining of her Valentino coat. She didn't call the police. She called Victor Sullivan." Chloe didn't know the names of the underworld, but the way Silas said it made her stomach churn. "Who is Victor Sullivan? A cleaner? A ghost?" "He's a freelancer who specializes in wiping out entire problems before the sun comes up." Silas walked over to a hidden panel in the wall, pressing his palm against it. The wall slid open, revealing a terrifying arsenal of tactical weaponry. He began loading a sleek, black handgun. "If she called Victor, it means she knows she can't convince me she's innocent," Silas explained, tossing a spare magazine onto the table. "It means she's officially declared war on her own son. She's taking over the family by force, and Victor's first contract will be to find you, extract the server password, and eliminate you." Chloe stared at the guns, the reality of her situation finally, truly setting in. She wasn't just a girl seeking justice anymore. She was the center of a Mafia civil war. "Then we have to release the files now," Chloe urged, stepping toward him. "Burn her to the ground. Let the FBI arrest her." "No," Silas snapped, turning to face her, the gun held loosely by his side. "If you release those files to the FBI, it doesn't just sink my mother. It sinks the entire Romano syndicate. It exposes our ports, our judges, our politicians. It puts me in federal prison right alongside her. I won't let you destroy my empire." "It's not an empire, Silas, it's a graveyard," Chloe yelled, her frustration boiling over. "Your mother murdered my father. She murdered yours. I want her locked in a cage." "She's not going to a cage," Silas said, stepping into her personal space, his imposing frame forcing her to look up at him. "People like my mother don't survive in cages. They buy the wardens. They run things from the inside. There is only one way a Romano loses power." Chloe stared into his dark, merciless eyes, reading the unspoken truth in the air between them. "You're going to kill her?" Chloe whispered, horrified, yet strangely mesmerized by the absolute certainty radiating from him. "I'm going to do what has to be done," Silas corrected softly. He reached up, his thumb gently tracing the line of Chloe's jaw. The touch was startlingly tender, a massive contrast to the violence he was proposing. "You brought me the match, Chloe. Now, you're going to help me burn it down. But first, we have to survive the night." Before Chloe could respond, the heavy, reinforced steel door of the penthouse groaned. It wasn't a knock. It was the sound of a high-grade thermite charge melting through the deadbolts. Victor Sullivan had found them. The heavy steel door of the penthouse blew inward with a deafening screech, taking the deadbolts and reinforced hinges with it. Thick, acrid gray smoke immediately poured into the pristine living room, obscuring the panoramic view of the Chicago skyline. Silas didn't hesitate. He grabbed Chloe by the waist, his grip bruising, and violently shoved her behind the massive, bulletproof marble island in the center of the kitchen. A split second later, the glass coffee table where her laptop sat shattered into a million glittering pieces as suppressed gunfire tore through the room. "Stay down and do not move," Silas roared over the deafening crack of bullets. He moved with a terrifying, predatory fluidity. He didn't blind fire, he calculated. Leaning around the edge of the marble, Silas fired 3 precise shots. 2 heavy thuds echoed through the smoke as the first wave of Victor Sullivan's men dropped to the hardwood floor, instantly neutralized. But Victor Sullivan wasn't a street thug. He was a phantom. "Silas," a smooth, disembodied voice echoed from the smoky corridor. "Your mother is paying me $5 million for the girl's head and the hard drive. You can walk away. I have no contract on you." "You stepped into my house, Victor," Silas called back, ejecting his spent magazine and slapping a fresh one into the grip of his pistol. "That makes you a dead man." Bullets rained against the marble island, chipping away chunks of expensive stone that rained down on Chloe. She covered her head, her heart threatening to crack her ribs. She looked at the laptop, which had miraculously survived the destruction of the table, resting precariously on a piece of unbroken glass a few feet away. "Silas," Chloe gasped, crawling closer to him. "We can't hold them off. Let me send the files to the FBI." "No." Silas grabbed her shoulder, his eyes locking onto hers with burning intensity. "If you send it to the feds, Judge Thomas Fitzgerald will intercept the warrants before dawn. He's been on my mother's payroll for a decade. The law won't save us, Chloe. Only the streets will." Chloe stared at him, the horrifying reality of his world crystallizing. "Then what do we do?" "You don't send the ledger to the authorities," Silas ordered, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "You send it to Don Carlo Calabrese. You highlight the $12 million my mother siphoned from the Apex Holdings deal. You show Carlo that Beatrice Romano hasn't just been stealing from her own family. She's been stealing from the entire Chicago Commission." Chloe's breath hitched. It was a stroke of absolute diabolical genius. She wouldn't be sending Beatrice to prison. She would be throwing her to the wolves she had tried to control. "Cover me," Chloe said. Before Silas could protest, Chloe scrambled out from behind the marble island. "Harding, no!" Silas yelled, rising and laying down a massive barrage of suppressive fire toward the hallway. Chloe threw herself across the floor, sliding over the shattered glass. It sliced through her cheap work pants, biting into her knees, but she didn't stop. She grabbed the laptop, her fingers slick with her own blood, and frantically tapped the trackpad to wake the screen. A bullet whizzed past her ear, so close she felt the heat of the displaced air. Silas returned fire, cursing violently. Chloe navigated the encrypted server. She bypassed the FBI's email routing and manually entered the direct encrypted contact for the Calabrese Syndicate, a digital address she had found buried in her father's deepest files, one he had labeled the Devil's Doorbell. She attached the ledger. She highlighted account 88429B. Come on, she muttered, the loading bar creeping across the screen. Transfer complete. It's done, Chloe screamed, dropping the laptop and scrambling back behind the kitchen island just as a fresh volley of bullets decimated the wall behind her. Silas didn't waste a second. He pulled out his heavily encrypted phone, hit a single speed dial number, and put it on speaker, holding it up so his voice would carry over the gunfire. "Victor," Silas shouted, "check your encrypted comms. Call your handler." The gunfire outside the kitchen abruptly ceased. The silence that followed was heavier and more terrifying than the bullets. For 30 agonizing seconds, the only sound in the penthouse was the howling wind rushing through the shattered windows and Chloe's ragged breathing. Silas kept his gun raised, his body shielding hers completely. Then, a cell phone rang in the hallway. They heard the muffled sound of Victor Sullivan answering. A few seconds later, the Phantom's voice drifted through the smoke, entirely devoid of its previous confidence. "Contract canceled," Victor announced into the dark apartment. "Beatrice Romano has been declared excommunicado by the commission. She is a dead woman walking." Footsteps retreated. The elevator doors chimed. Sullivan was gone. Chloe collapsed against the marble counter, burying her face in her hands, her whole body shaking violently. The adrenaline was finally leaving her system, leaving nothing but cold, brutal reality in its wake. Silas slowly lowered his weapon. He looked around the decimated penthouse, then down at the waitress bleeding on his floor, the woman who had just dismantled the most powerful crime family in the Midwest with a few keystrokes. He knelt in front of her, ignoring the glass crunching beneath his knees. He gently pulled her hands away from her face. His amber eyes were no longer cold. They burned with a terrifying, possessive reverence. "My father is avenged," Chloe whispered, a tear finally escaping and cutting a path through the soot on her cheek. "It's over." "No, Chloe," Silas murmured, his thumb gently wiping the tear away, his touch sending a dark, electric shiver down her spine. "The queen is dead, but the throne is empty, and you and I are just getting started." Chloe walked into the restaurant, not as a waitress, but as royalty. The powerful patrons who once ignored her now lowered their eyes in absolute, terrified deference. Silas stood by the velvet booth, pulling out a chair for the woman who had burned down a criminal empire only to build a deadlier one beside him. She sought justice for her father. Instead, she found a beautiful, dark, and dangerous eternity.